Thanks, everybody, for being here today for the first of our series of speakers for the Posthumanism Research Institute for 2022-2023. We are very happy to welcome Joanna Zylinska, who is an artist, writer, and curator, and professor of media philosophy and critical digital practice in the Department of Digital Humanities at King's College London. She's the author of a number of books, including AI Art, Machine Visions and Warped Dreams, which is available at Open Humanities Press from 2020. The End of Man, A Feminist Counter-Apocalypse, University of Minnesota Press, 2018, and Non-Human Photography at the MIT Press, published in 2017. Joanna is an advocate of radical open access, which I'm fully behind. She's the editor of the Media Art Right Now book series for Open Humanities Press. And her art practice involves experimenting with different kinds of image-based media. In 2013, she was artistic director of Transisio MX05 Biomediations, the biggest Latin American new media festival, which took place in Mexico City. She's currently researching perception and cognition as boundary zones between human and machine intelligence, while exploring the future of photography in the shadow of artificial intelligence. So without further ado, I am happy to give you the floor, Joanna, to speak to us on performing planetarity. Joanna, thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine, and thank you. I'm very happy to be here with you virtually at Brock University. Always happy to talk to other kind of post-humanities scholars and students. Let me just start from trying to share my screen, and hopefully it all happens. Okay. So I'm going to talk about performing planetarity. I'll start by saying that today humans in different geopolitical locations are less and less able to see themselves as inhabitants, or if they belong to a more privileged class, as citizens of the world. Instead, we are increasingly being interpolated to recognize ourselves as planetary beings, de-anchored and dislodged. A realization which involves having to counter with the fact that, as Dipesh Chakravorty puts it, the planet remains profoundly indifferent to our existence. Now, my work engages with planetary concerns, yet it's not itself produced from a planetary perspective, with the producer's eye lodged high in the sky. Instead, it emerges in medias res, amidst the matter of media, the piles of techno-rubbish, the threat of organic and non-organic viruses. Driven by an awareness that the planet doesn't indeed care, I posit that this lack of care needn't, or indeed shouldn't, be mutual. And it's in the mobilization of our responsibility for the planet and the modes of its inhabitation that my theoretical and artistic work is enacted. So this talk today presents my method for conducting artistic research, which also entails an epistemic proposition, while being driven by an ethical injunction. And it all happens under the kind of aegis of kind of post-humanist theory. So this injunction I'm talking about is shaped by a complex set of responsibilities exerted not only by humans towards one another, but also by non-human beings, including planet Earth as our habitation partner and life source. So maybe I should provide a little bit of background to illustrate where I'm coming from in terms of kind of my intellectual and creative training. So I started a new job about a year ago at King's College London, and my job title, which I invented myself, perfectly encapsulates what I'm about academically and creatively. I'm a professor of media philosophy and critical digital practice. And this picture is just, as well as showing the mess that my head is, it shows you also a visual map of my research interests and my kind of artistic trajectory. So prior to joining King's, I spent 17 years at Goldsmiths, University of London, in the media department. And Goldsmiths, as many of you might know, it's an art school associated with then called young British artists, people like Damien Hirst, Sarah Lucas, filmmakers such as Steve McQueen, and more broadly, as an institution, it has a creative and critical ethos. And originally, I had trained as a theorist in the areas of literature and digital philosophy. Then when already working as a professor at Goldsmiths, I did a master's in photography. And this completely changed the way I work and think, encouraging me to incorporate visual practice into the theory, but also to develop a hybrid mode of engaging with the world through words as well as moving and still images, while also getting me to explore a little more the very idea of the book. So like many of us, I'm an academic hybrid. And my current position at King's College allows me to bring together these two aspects of my academic career, artistic career, and officially somehow to try and work out a way of navigating between them. Now, my talk today will consist of two parts. The first one involves a guided tour of my earlier project through which my method of working will be outlined. Offering a remix of texts, images, and concepts from my previous work, it reflects back on over 2 decades of what can retrospectively be described as a planetary praxis that attempts to make a small difference. The second part of my talk introduces a more recent work of mine called Feminist with a Drone, designed as a creative critical attempt to perform planetarity on a micro scale. My overall aim in this talk is to demonstrate the way in which my work both responds to and forecasts a number of sometimes literally burning issues of the present moment. The hybrid method of my work, which brings together philosophy and artistic research, is intended to expand our epistemological horizon, as outlined by academic convention and human cognitive practice, with a view to allowing us to see, sense, and say things via a variety of modes and media. But I'm also always keen to keep a check on the hubris that sometimes feature in theorists' or artists' pronouncements about our work and its purported scale and influence. Now, given the complexity and scale of the environmental crisis manifesting itself in rising sea levels, air pollution, accelerated species extinction, and a climate shift, it's understandable why planetarity is playing an increasingly prominent role in the arts, humanities, and social sciences. Positioned as a concept that can help us understand these changes, it has recently been used as a call to responsibility and action. In the 2020 special issue of the arts journal Efflux, You and I Don't Live on the Same Planet, edited by Martin Guinard, Bruno Latour, and others. In the books Planetary Social Thought, The Anthropocene Challenge in the Social Sciences by Nigel Clarke and Bronislaw Selsinski, as well as The Climate of History in a Planetary Age by Dipesh Chakrabarty, which I cited earlier. And it's within the framework of the recently postulated epoch of the Anthropocene, an epoch in which the human is said to have become a significant geological agent, that planetary thinking has most often been outlined. Chakrabarty makes a strong plea for adopting the planet as a particularly relevant concept in the current geopolitical moment, due to its ability to grasp a dynamic ensemble of relationships, much as Hegel's state or Karl Marx's capital were, an ensemble that constitutes the Earth system. Now, many of the theorists engaging with issues of planetarity today do so in dialogue with post-colonial writer Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak, specifically with a final chapter titled Planetarity in her short polemical book, Death of a Discipline, published in 2002. In her argument, Spivak opposed the abstraction of globalization, which she saw as the imposition of the same system of exchange everywhere, to the differentiated political space of planetarity. The globe is on our computers. No one lives there. It allows us to think that we can aim to control it. The planet is in the species of alterity, belonging to another system, and yet we inhabit it on loan, she wrote. The planetary perspective embraced by Spivak is paradoxically yet importantly always partial. Introducing the sense of the uncanny in the reader, it's also presented as a demand and a call to responsibility. Now, how is this responsibility to be experienced, enacted, or perhaps negated? Who is its addressee, its subject? And is the subject always human? These questions, which have for a long time guided my academic and artistic practice, call for an in-depth examination of the very constitution of the human as both a species and a historical subject. Adopting the geological probe of deep time, I propose we need to look at the emergence of the human in conjunction with the surrounding technologies, such as tools and other artifacts, but also communication in its various modes, be they everyday language, storytelling, ethics, art, and media. We also need to explore the entanglement of human and non-human forms of intelligence, including the promises and threats offered by AI. This exploration needs to overcome the figure ground distinction typically adopted in the humanities as a model for analyzing the world, to embrace the planetary model used by earth science. Yet I also want to suggest that if it is to exercise a meaningful sense of responsibility and not just an aesthetic sensibility, a planetary perspective in artistic research needs to be anchored in the socio-political concerns of the here and now, primarily the ecological and economic crises, but also the gendering and racialization of the apocalyptic narratives brought in as responses to those crises. As well as looking into the human and non-human past, we need to look into the future of the human and of the human habitat. For this human future to have a future, its timeline needs to be considered and experienced in contiguity with the needs and demands of non-humans, from animals through to mycelium, insects, plants, and rocks. This entangled mode of seeing the planet in terms of Earth systems creates the ground for enacting said responsibility. It calls for a responsible response, even if the conditions and principles of this response will still need to be worked out. And so what's going to play in the background without sound is the film Exit Man, which is a film I made, which is an attempt to enact this response and responsibility in a kind of different medium. And is manifested in the hybrid open access project presented here, which is the short book, The End of Man, A Feminist Counter-Apocalypse, that Christina mentioned, and the Exit Man film that I showed you a very short clip from. My work embraces the notion of praxis, which is a combination of theoretical inquiry and artistic practice that is intended to make a critical intervention in the world. And as part of this inquiry, I'm interested in how art can face planetary concerns and articulate them via different media. The media I use includes still and moving images, photography and post-photography, sound, speculative design, and AI. In disciplinary terms, I take a digital humanities approach that moves beyond the text to embrace images, data, algorithms, and visualizations as not only things to study, but also things to make knowledge with. As part of my inquiry into human and machine cognition, intelligence, and perception, images are particularly important to me. In the era of computational imaging, it's not so much the visual content as singular artifacts that commands my attention. Rather, I'm primarily grappling with Lev Manovich's question that drives his cultural analytics project. How can you see 1 billion images? But I also follow it up with another question. Are the seer and the image maker always only human? Now, this altered volume and agency of images, especially digital images today, does indeed require new concepts and methods for studying them. The notion of non-human photography I proposed several years ago in the book of the same title offered an analysis of this new ontological and political conjuncture. So this notion encapsulates three interconnected conceptual planes: photographs that are not of the human, depopulated landscapes; photographs that are not by the human, Google Street View, but also fossils; and photographs that are not for the human, QR codes. But non-human photography is not just a book. It's also a website, a museum, and a series of visual projects. So let me tell you about one of them, a project that deals with the question of scale in image production. It was titled Active Perceptual Systems, and it was included in the book. It was an attempt on my part to deal with the question of planetary scale in image production and consumption. The images that make up the Active Perceptual Systems project were taken over a period of 2 years with an automated intelligent wearable camera called the autographer. Originally designed as a mnemonic device for Alzheimer's patients, the autographer was remarketed as a media gadget tool for the always-on generation. For 2 years, I wore the camera in various everyday situations: on a city walk, in a holiday resort, in an art gallery, in a lecture theatre, at home. Inconspicuous due to its resemblance to a small necklace, yet clearly visible, the camera randomly captured photographs at frequent intervals, which I then uploaded to my computer. My decision to wear the camera on a given day, switch it on, and then select and process the images was coupled with the decision of the camera algorithm regarding what to photograph and when. The machining behavior was influenced by the way I moved my body, enacting a form of immersive corporeal perception that broke with the representationalist linearity of perspectival vision, while also retaining human involvement in the multiple acts of image capture. The human element was also foregrounded in the subsequent editing activities. I was faced with over 18,000 images from which I chose several dozen. The selection process was akin to making careful incisions in the image flow with a view to setting up narrative connections. In an age of constant surveillance, from omnipresent CCTV cameras through to self-monitoring via the constant recording of our lives with mobile phones, Active Perceptual Systems was designed as a commentary on this constant fabrication of images of us, but also by us. It also raised the question whether, in the age of image deluge, the creative image maker could be seen as first and foremost an editor, what philosopher Willem Flusser has called an informer, who provides form or informs or provides structure to the imagistic flow after the images have been taken. Now, Flusser's point brings us to the problem of creativity as enacted by human and machine intelligence. Another project of mine, an online photo book presented as a video called View from the Window, was an attempt to investigate this problem. Included as part of the book, AI Art, Machine Visions and Warped Dreams, it discussed the relationship between AI, creativity and invention, while arguing that looking into the creativity of computers and other machines was a misguided venture, and that we should first of all explore about, what it actually meant for humans to be creative. As the problem of creativity is inherently bound with the socio-political conditions in which such creativity can be actualized, we should also examine the problem of labor that AI poses for creative work. Amazon's Mechanical Turk platform, an online marketplace connecting labor suppliers with providers worldwide, can serve as an apt case study for this examination. Amazon has informally been using the rather inelegant term artificial intelligence to describe its platform. The labor on Mechanical Turk consists of HITs, human intelligence tasks, involving simple mechanical actions performed on digital data, such as tagging photographs or filling in surveys, priced very cheaply. Basically, Mechanical Turk puts humans in the role of machines, as it would be too impractical and costly to program a computer which could perform such tasks. In an uncanny anticipation of the world become window situation of coronavirus capitalism, where we all constantly lived and worked on Zoom and MS Teams and other platforms, in 2018, I had commissioned 100 Turkers to take one photo of a view from a window of the room they were in at the time. I had explained that this hit was needed for a research art project which studied human and machine creativity. Post-processing was allowed, though not required. The hit was priced at double the US living wage, which probably explains why all the tasks had been snapped up and fulfilled almost immediately. Although given that the task was to take 1 to 2 minutes on average, it was hardly alleviating world poverty. Indeed, the very act of using Mechanical Turk for this project was not unproblematic, and can actually be said to be perpetuating unfair labor conditions worldwide by validating Amazon's platform. The exploration of these conditions also forms the fabric of my project. I don't know where the Turkers that responded to my call came from, although it's possible to make some guesses from the images using signage, architecture, and vegetation as signposts. From a 2018 academic study, we learned that most of the Turk workers are from the USA, 75%, with India being second, followed by Canada, Great Britain, Philippines, and Germany. Turkers operate anonymously and are only identified through their assigned number, creating an illusion of a fluid mobile labor force that forms part of a digital cloud. The idea behind my project was to rematerialize the cloudy vapor behind this narrative by creating a group portrait of Turkers' locations. Neither conventional portraiture nor landscape photography, the collective image base of view from the window offers a non-comprehensive demographic snapshot of the global workforce looking out. Simulating the work of machines in its quiet efficiency, Amazon's Turk labor force raptures the seamless narrative and visualization of the machinic world. It does this by bringing the material traces of human bodies and their locations into the picture. The view from the window shows us that there is a window in the first place, or not. The window is not just a rectangular visualization of the software interface patented by Microsoft and used by other operating systems, but also a metal or wooden frame holding a glass pane, but also occasionally curtains, shutters, or a mosquito net that brings in the outside world, while also keeping it at bay precisely as the outside. The project offers a specific vantage point for perceiving the relationship between humans and technology at this particular moment in time, and more importantly, a recognition that there is a vantage point, and that the view from nowhere promoted by most AI designers ends up putting up a very specific white male ahistorical human in the picture. A broader goal of the work is also to interrogate whose interests are being represented and who can afford to be creative, when and for how long. Now that under COVID-19, we have all become Turkers in Microsoft's or Zoom's digital factories, this question couldn't indeed be timelier. And I'm now developing some of the threads from that work on AI, machine visions, and warped dreams into a larger scale project. So currently I'm working on the reconfiguration of the eye in the digital age and the humanist blind spots in machine vision. So I'm showing you in the background now an excerpt from a recent video titled Neuromatic, sorry, there's nothing romantic about it, Neuromatic. And the voiceover reads, can machines see? What does it mean for humans to endow machines with the capacity for seeing? But is it actually clear how humans see the world? And is there even a human eye that does the seeing? Are humans, in fact, seeing machines? Now, to make the video, I reanimated, with the help of a GAN algorithm, some historical and contemporary medical images of eyes and brains from the Wellcome collection, which is a collection of medical images in the UK. In recent years, many AI researchers have gone beyond the explicit oculocentrism of machine vision to extend the study of machines' data capture operations to other senses, such as hearing, touch, and olfaction. Google is now using the term machine perception in lieu of machine vision. But the concept of machine perception I'm using in this short art video and also a full-length documentary I'll be making is adopted in a wider sense to refer to a constant sense of seeing and being seen between humans and machines. We are all living in what I'm calling a perception machine. So the project is an update with a feminist twist of Virilius' vision machine. And that kind of brings me to another work, which is conceptually very much in line with the previous ones, and which is still kind of dealing with the question of planetarity, but uses kind of different artifacts. So in an attempt to identify technical and conceptual openings within the dominant structures of planetary visibility, I subsequently developed, as part of my art practice, a project titled Feminist with a Drone. Presented in the form of field notes, it mobilized drone technology currently used in amazing amateur drone Instagram stills and YouTube videos from beautiful locations in the world, shot in coupling with GoPro Hero cameras. What I wanted to do was enact a less masterful, less heroic, and less domineering viewpoint, one that doesn't flatten the world into a postcard or a diagram. So the project is an installation, including these mock ethnographic notes and a series of images. So let me just guide you through these field notes. On 12th of December 2020, I purchased a Rise Tello drone. Designed by industry giant DJI, this mini drone, marketed as the most fun drone ever, is aimed at teaching kids and adults how awesome flying can be. The exploration of this awesomeness was the key goal of my fieldwork. My first outing with the Tello took place on the 24th of December 2020 in a small park in a residential area of southwest London. During the flight times of up to 13 minutes, I captured a sequence of still and moving images from the height of between 2 and 10 meters. The experiment came to a halt when the drone flew away on descent. The follow-up search didn't yield any results. The situation compounded by unpropitious weather conditions and approaching dusk, with the drone then considered lost. The following day, the drone was located in a different part of the park. The experiment in testing the drone's awesomeness was resumed the following week. Some images were taken during the first flight. On its second ascent, the drone lost one of its propellers, with the propeller itself becoming lost amongst the park's vegetation. A replacement propeller was installed, but this made the drone inoperative, with the device losing the capacity to fully lift off the ground. This concluded my attempt to fly the drone and take images with it. Loss was a key characteristic of my experience with the Rise Tello. Okay, so could things have gone any worse? Was the fieldwork conducted as part of my project a failure? Crucially, should I have bought a better, more manly and more high-tech drone? In the spirit of feminist bricolage, an approach which remains aware of power relations while foregrounding the practices of shaping, crafting and producing that academics usually hide and often hide behind in the production of beautiful and polished surfaces unpunctured by doubts, hesitation and incompletion, I'm citing here Rachel Handfuls and Carol Taylor, I decided to repurpose my losses. The limited sample of images obtained from the drone's camera and their relatively low quality, coupled with the loss of the drone's functionality, led to the development of a hypothesis about the possibility of constructing an alternative drone visuality, which I termed loser images. As a feminist rejoinder to the amazing drone views mentioned earlier, as you could see on Instagram or on YouTube, I offer loser images as a figuration that channels some of the potential of the multi-perspectival human-machinic worldview without falling for its grandeur of scale. Figurations such as the cyborg, modest witness, or nomadic subject used in the work of feminist thinkers of technology such as Donna Haraway or Rosie Braidotti are thought devices aimed at shaping a different political imaginary or performing an alternative image of the future. Yet rather than propose a straightforward return to a more human or humane perspective in response to this master aerial vision, I aim to probe further the creative potential of decoupling sight from a bipedal human body and dispersing it across the environment. I am therefore interested in mobilizing the same image-making technology to enact a less masterful, less domineering, and less heroic way of visioning and imaging. This alternative form of post-Anthropocene visuality doesn't flatten the world into a postcard while excising its inhabitants of different scales from the picture. Instead, it envisages a more porous planetscape and a more entangled and messy ecology. The minor intervention into the grand problem of planetarity I'm presenting in this talk has an affinity with geographer Heather McLean's praise of chaotic research pathways. McLean offers her chaotic methodology by way of a feminist response to planetary urbanization. Specifically, she is responding to the planetary approach to the study of cities offered by Neil Brenner and Christian Schmidt. McLean recognizes the value of her colleagues' critique of globalized yet static approaches to urbanism, approaches which uncritically praise creativity, innovation, and sustainability without taking into account contradictory geo-economic forces that constitute cities and regions. Yet she also points out that there is something both totalizing and limiting about the planetary approach they offer in response, in that it privileges a lineage of particular white, male, and European Marxist and neo-Marxist political economists at the expense of feminist, queer, and anti-colonial contributions to this subfield. It also positions researchers as pre-constituted and monadic entities, not as living, breathing beings, emerging as part of their work, praxis, or struggle. So my loser images go beyond the perfect planetary vision of the drone eye, but they also transcend the airy planetarity of much of contemporary theory, which seems to have left behind Spivak's commitment to partial views, inhabitation, and an authority that makes a difference. Conceptually, Feminist with a Drone engages humor, irony, and partiality as feminist methods for conducting work in technoscience and technoculture. Those modes of affectively remodulating the traditional framework of what counts as knowledge and scholarship proper open up alternative ways of seeing and doing. McLean also works in this vein, for example, with her drag king performance at a cabaret called Fail Better, a Glasgow space featuring artists of colour, queer and working class artists. Adopting a drag king persona of an urban think tank expert, Toby Sharp, promoting tools for urban change as part of the creative cities agenda, she engages feminist critique not only in her scholarly research, but also in her cabaret act. Creative urban communities are therefore not just treated by her as objects of study, they become research partners. McLean admits that from a planetary standpoint, promoted by theorists such as Brenner and Schmidt, activities such as those taking place at the Fail Better cabaret could be positioned as, at best, ineffective. She also fears that through a lens preoccupied with mapping flows of capital, local sites of activism can end up looking as weak and useless in the face of steamroller-like neoliberal policies. I share McLean's concerns. Like her, I have experienced challenges to my attempts to enact alternative modes of producing academic knowledge. Yet like her, I believe there is too much at stake to just give up, especially as the accusation of weakness is itself a gendered strategy aimed at renormalizing the militant and heroic victorious ways of acting, be it as knowledge producer, political actor, or artist. Polish philosopher Ewa Majewska has gone so far as to propose what she has termed the avant-garde of the weak, a mode of working which combines the feminist rejections of patriarchal visions of genius and creativity and emancipatory claims originating in the peripheries, with their demand for an expanded epistemology, one including marginalized and colonized territories in art history and practice. Feminist with a Drone was therefore designed as a performance of planetarity as a research problem, but it was also already a form of research designed as a performance. My goal with this was to perform the study of planetarity and of the associated disciplines of art history, ethnography, geography, urban studies, architecture, and design with their colonial histories and epistemological exclusions differently. Even though the method and the tools used, a toy drone, a beach ball, may seem naive and childlike, their underlying ambition to challenge our ongoing planetary foolishness, as well as our partial vision, are very serious indeed. The loser images figuration produced in the process follows in the footsteps of Hito Steil, whose keen notion of poor images has become an important trope in contemporary critical studies of the image. Steil used the term to describe lossy digital images traversing the networked personal computers of our globe. Their poverty referred to their low quality and low resolution as a result of their incessant replication on ever cheaper media, but it also pointed to the wider condition of cultural disjuncture, where the impoverishment of many image producers and image subjects went hand in hand with the enrichment of those in control of digital infrastructures. My loser images are precisely such poor images of the world, serving as counterpoints to the amazing drone views of planet Earth from Instagram. They are a testament to the poor quality of the camera and the limited skills of its operator. There is something not quite right with them as both representations and captures. The worldview they present is out of sync, wobbly, smeary, somehow degraded. Yet these loser images are not just mine. The concept is primarily meant to serve as a viewing, structuring, and archiving device, allowing us to develop a counter-visuality from what is already there. In her article, Online Weak and Poor Images on Contemporary Visual Politics, Czech theorist Teresa Stejskalova has made an appeal to make use of online images in a way that presents a challenge to the mass image, profit-driven network platform, and to seek oppositional agency for images posted on social platforms. So I'm going to explain now what I'm actually showing you if I'm showing you these grids, and what I mean by saying these images are not just mine and it's a bigger project of kind of creating networks of loser images. So say in the spirit of the avant-garde of the week of loser images, I have mined with the help of the deep learning similarity algorithm of the visual search engine called Same Energy, which is a bit like Google's search by image, but more look and mood based. I've searched millions of images from Reddit, Instagram, and Pinterest with a view to developing visual affinities with my own failed images. The grids obtained transcend both the modernist elegance of Bernd and Hilaire Becher's industrial typologies and the colorful seamlessness of the amazing drone posts on Instagram to inaugurate an open-ended, noisy archive from which a different picture of the planet can emerge. In the spirit of the avant-garde of the week, the project offers a possibility to overcome the individualism of performance and spectatorship by a commonality of experiencing failure and weakness, as Majewska has it, or at least to stage this failure and weakness as a shared experience. Today's artist, as Stejskalova aptly observes, needs to understand that she is not special, nor is she doing anything special, but is in principle like any other social network user who makes manifest the crisis of emotions, relations, and labor which sustain life itself. Picking up a baton from Steil, I'm therefore speaking here in defense of the poor image of the world, low resolution, widely accessible, pirated. I'm speaking here for what we might term, with a nod to Gary Hall, an ethical piracy. In pirate philosophy, Hall revisits the Latin origins of the verb pirao, which meant to make an attempt, try, test, endeavor, attack, to refer to piratic practices in text and images which go against the grain of traditional knowledge production, its classification and distribution. Loser images are pirate images because they tease and give trouble, as per the word's Greek etymology. Loser images also drop out of the competitive system of accolades, prizes, and totems. They drop out of individual authorship, yet their marginal cultural status is not by itself a guarantee of progressivism. As recent years have aptly demonstrated, the right can meme very well indeed. Loser images embrace their machinic heritage, but they also take on board the inevitable failures of human bodies and machinic infrastructures. As part of their weak feminist efficacy, they therefore show up the dominant perception machine that we all inhabit as structurally and politically broken. Offering a fragile yet tender look, loser images differ from ruin porn, that is the aestheticization of loss, decay, and poverty, which is part of the dominant Anthropocene visuality. They restage planetarity as a call for help, enacting the collective exhaustion of humans, machines, and the environment. Loser images are therefore unproductive because they work against the logic of planetary extractivism, the depletion of natural and human resources, planetary management via technological improvement. To speak in defense of the poor image of the world is to mobilize an ethical injunction to see the world better and to make better things in it. It's an injunction to look around and askew, to look obliquely, to respond to the limitations of the image, and to know that the picture is always partial. Offering a fragile yet tender look, they differ from ruin porn. This is a minimal form of responsibility that we as artists and theorists can perhaps aim to make. And this idea of minimal responsibility links to an earlier text of mine, which kind of outlines a responsibility which only has an injunction, but which is not yet filled in with positive content. And you can download these 21 theses for minimal ethics and the book itself for free, again, from Open Humanities. And I think I'll stop here and I will say thank you. Okay, and
thank you. Thank you so much, Joanna. There is so much resonating in your talk, like very interesting work that you are doing. And what I did not foresee was this kind of intersection between some of your themes, the machinic thinking and machinic vision, and some of the explorations that our artist researcher performance is going to explore next week in St. Catherine's. So, but from an auditory perspective. So that's really interesting, and I didn't expect that. So I was like, oh, okay, great. It's as if I planned it, but I didn't. I do have questions, and there is a question already in the chat. I would ask anyone in attendance who has a question or comment to please write your question in the chat box, and I will then read the question to Joanna. And while people are sorting their thoughts, I would just like to maybe ask, and maybe this is a bad question, and maybe I'm not thinking this right, but once upon a time I was working on a paper that didn't go anywhere, maybe because I was not asking the question in the right way. I was looking at Ian Bogost's suggestion that Stephen Shore's photographs were ontographs. That is pictures of objects were giving us access to what objects are, like how they exist, how they are in the world. And I was toying with this idea and looking at the power of digital images as opposed to analog images and digital cinema and all these things. And I kept stumbling on the issue that I thought the suggestion that Shore's images were ontographs was really interesting, but I kept stumbling on the idea that it was still a human who placed the camera where they did. It's still very much an anthropocentric perspective. And if we're going to say that vision or any kind of sensual perception is not the outcome of a subject coming to an object and perceiving it, but rather an encounter of multiple factors, how do we do away with that anthropocentric element? And I couldn't resolve that. And maybe that's not asking the question, right? But if you could say something to that, and then I'll go to the other questions.
I don't think we can fully resolve it as such, but I think we can probably ask more questions and probe things a little bit more. And one of the questions I'm always asking of object-oriented kind of ontology is about its implicit humanism, which I think is its blind spot, in the sense that, you know, the very notion of the object and the parameters of that object are already produced through a particular process of visualization of the human. And it's not to say, I'm not denying the existence of stuff in the world, call it matter, call it whatever, but the delineation of object boundaries is kind of visual and happens differently in different species, for different organisms and for non-organic entities as well. So in a way, the human designates certain things as objects and gives them certain value, and other species, because they see in different colors and different spectra with different intensities, might have a very different sense of objecthood. So that very sense of, you know, whatever it is that imprints itself, it's interesting. But you were right about the camera being placed by the human. I mean, I think for me, the project I'm currently working it's a book which contains some of these later projects, a follow-up to non-human photography, and it's working through that tension between, on the one hand, the machine, the apparatus being pre-programmed, programmable, on the other hand, still allowing the human to glitch the software somehow. And I'm thinking here with Flusser. So there is no naive desire to do things outside the system, because, you know, whichever system we are talking about, be it a technological or social, because it's just not outside to any of those as such. But there is a realization that while we are able to, counter, with the forces that are organizing that system and maybe shift things within it a little bit, while perhaps there is still time, well, perhaps we've got that. But also there are other processes of impressioning that go beyond what Stephen Shaw did, like processes like, you know, geological imprinting, like, you know, fossils, for example, could be a form of more radical way of making images. And in that sense, you know, the first photograph in the history of photography, the so-called first photograph, Nicéphore Niepce's view from his house in Bourgogne in France, which took 8 hours to produce, was in a way even more radical, because it has shadows on both sides and it captures the picture, which is never a view one human could see, because you never see shadows over the period of 8 hours. So that already, there was something more radical happening in the early days of imaging.
Yeah, no, that is fascinating. And I should note that at some point you made a little slip, and instead of saying operator, you said operated, and then you switched to operator. And I thought, yeah, how much is the human behind all this also operated by all the apparatus and the encounter and everything? But I'll stop, because we have questions here in the chat. So there is a question from Mitch, and Mitch, since you are in the room with us, would you like to ask your question instead of me reading it? Or not? Okay, so Mitch is asking, I wonder what your thoughts are regarding photographs taken by animals. And he has given a link here to a website. Attendees can see it. I guess I could copy it, and I'm going to try to copy it and put it in our chat. But it's about, I guess the title of the entry is Animal Rights Advocates Photographer Compromise over Ownership of Monkey Selfie. So
yes,
yeah.
I'm familiar with that controversy, and that obviously arose when, you know, a monkey took a picture, and there was an interesting discussion about copyright and whether, you know, who owned the copyright, did the monkey really take the picture? If the cameras are such, you know, automated devices anyway, it almost doesn't matter. Is there any difference between a monkey pressing, the shutter button, or wind, or is there a difference between a human pressing, you know, the button, or a lot of the gestures that we as humans are enacting are already like automated behaviors, while we think we're exercising some agency. I mean, the majority of photographs taken by people with their mobile phones are the same, because the computational photography has ensured they already have been algorithmically pre-designed, you know, cleansed, run through a series of programs to make them look a certain way. So in a way, that whole scandal around the copyright of the image, and obviously I'm very interested in what we get animals to do and not to do, and that's a whole other debate that obviously should happen, and it's a very important ethical problem. But I think in this, and I think the question of animal creativity is of great interest to me, around, for example, what bowerbirds do with their decoration of their nests for aesthetic reasons, and you know, go beyond just the kind of sexual need. So there is something kind of interesting going on here. But returning to that specific example that of you know, the monkey with that took the picture, I think it does open up the question of ownership, of rights, and of, you know, who can be the author, how we define the author. So it's very interesting, because it's like the, you know, Foucault-Barthes debate about the death of the author has returned again, and it's returned again now with the programs like DALL-E 2 and Mid-Journey, that, you know, generating images by themselves, so-called, although of course we know it's not by themselves, because they've been trained a certain way, and also they've been trained using a plethora of images taken for free from lots of other creatives. So all these questions around copyright, they're also political questions and legal questions that are kind of worth exploring. But problem of animal creativity is fascinating, but I don't think that one, the story of the monkey doesn't quite, I think, address or even open this up. It just...
Okay, great, thanks. Actually, some of the AI art generators you mentioned are the object of the next question. So Maya Karanu is asking, well, first saying thank you for the very interesting presentation, Joanna. In regards to the new text-to-image AI art generators, such as DALL-E and DALL-E 2 and Mid-Journey, I wonder what your thoughts are on the agency of the AI in these spaces and their roles as collaborators. And she says, my question is directed in regards to the concept of artist as editor that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I've been obviously inevitably playing with all these new engines, because I'm interested in, you know, what happens when they throw up. I'm also interested in the debates around it, and say one of the debates is obviously the question of copyright and the databases, what they'd been trained on. The training sets are always interesting. And obviously, I'm a little suspicious about this whole idea of agency of AI within that. I don't know, maybe one day. But at the moment, there is obviously an enactment of something, but it is a certain kind of way of interpolating some data and producing something on the basis of kind of prior training. And obviously, some of these results are, you know, shocking to us. Some are pleasing. Some are extremely interesting. I recently was at a conference where people were using it in studios as scenery, you know, stage design, especially for animation movies, saying now it takes them 2 days to do what it would have taken them 2 months. And they are working especially in the combination of Mid-Journey and some other stable diffusion and things like that. So I am very interested in that idea of co-creation, but at the same time thinking art historically, maybe we have always co-created with non-human elements, if you like. Artists have co-created with drugs, sometimes signing, you know, whatever they took to produce a given painting. Artists have co-created with viruses. Artists have co-created with, you know, with devices like our technologies, our tools also make with us and through us. So that maybe human, non-human co-creation is perhaps at the very origin of art, rather than just something. It's just with new technology, with every new technology, that non-human condition of the human or technological condition of the human is brought to the fore. And that makes us uncomfortable because we perhaps have forgotten about this, was because to a large extent, most of our art and cultural institutions still function on the romantic idea of the cultural producer, artist, writer, as a singular kind of standalone romantic genius. So this idea of this perennial co-creation is maybe something uncomfortable, but it's something I find fascinating. Of course, not all forms of co-creation are born equal. Some of them also have, different political and social exigencies and consequences, and they need to be explored, as I tried to do it with the Mechanical Turk project. But as the process of, maybe things have always been like this with different technologies, is something that fascinates me.
Thank you so much for this. And I think, I guess I would like to maybe push a little bit on this contrast that we may draw between art, a collaborator in art creation that would be an AI, and a biological agent, so bacteria or fungi. And I've been reading a lot on bioart and eco art recently. And one thing that is very often emphasized is the level of indeterminacy and unpredictability, and having to, as human co-creator, having to open oneself to the possibility that things will go in any number of unpredicted ways, and that this is what this kind of art entails to a degree. Is there an assumption when we work with AI, is there an assumption that AI is more of a tool, say a tool that we have better control of, or something that will function in maybe less of an unpredictable manner, because it's silicon based, because ultimately it's been programmed by a human? Like, is there a valid contrast there, or are we just mistaken in our assumptions when we work with these tools or collaborators?
I think, maybe we also need to open up this whole kind of notion of AI, because I think we need to speak about specific algorithms, specific machine learning algorithms that are doing specific things. So, when people kind of think about AI, whether it's like in the form of a kind of robot or some other nebulous, general artificial intelligence that will come and take our jobs. And, every other day there is an article by some, usually young males from some tech organization, telling us that, it is imminent and that they are coming for us. I mean, the robots. So, and perhaps they are, perhaps they aren't. But also, I think what these kinds of stories around, what AI will do and what do, and some other, forms of co-creation, coexistence, co-emergence, you're talking about biological forms of life. Maybe it's not a matter of a radical difference between one and the other, but looking at the specificity of different forms of relations. So is it even within that kind of biological, because the whole boundary between, so already Haraway has taught us that the distinction between the kind of carbon and silicon is increasingly getting fluid, but doesn't mean that all cyborgs are created equal. And the whole idea of the cyborg was to show, that some cyborgs as a kind of organism produced by kind of big tech, or are precisely meant to, they are meant to generate capital and forms of extraction and exclusion to only like some very narrow groups of social groups, and while creating forms of injustice for others. And obviously she turned it on its head and trying to show a cyborg could be a figure of liberation. So I think it's a bit like that with all of these. I think we need to study all those relations in their singularity, if you like. So I think we need to study specific algorithms, what they do, to demystify them a little bit, to understand how they are produced, and to go against this, like people often say, oh, we don't really know because it's a black box. Well, it is like a black box to some extent, but also we understand more or less the kind of processes that go into the training of the algorithm. We understand also the data sets that we are feeding. So it's not like we don't know anything. And so as much as we need to break AI down into singular relationships, we also need with those biological organisms. I mean, we're going to have a different relationship with fungi that become part of an art practice. And we are going to have a different relationship with cancer or with COVID-19, presumably. And we're going to have different responses to that form of co-emergence or coexistence. Some of them we will welcome, others will obviously say, no, thank you. And as long as we still can, because there might be a time we're in no position, no matter what we say or do, the other organism might be a bit more forceful. And it has been, obviously, as we've seen in the last 3 years with many individuals and groups.
Yeah. I like your emphasis on relations, and I think, yes, like thinking about not these different agents so much as how they relate. And also, I think, keeping in mind that these relations can be asymmetrical in all kinds of different ways, and what that means. So, yeah, I really like that answer a lot. It seems that my box window, which is attached to the streaming link, is frozen. So I'm going to attempt to refresh, and I hope it doesn't stop the streaming. If it does, please stay tuned, because I will reactivate it if it does stop it. So sure. If you'll just give me a second. Mm-hmm. Okay, it looks like the stream is still on. So yes, now I see Ola's question, which had disappeared for me. I had seen it for 1 second and then didn't see it again. So, okay, good. So Ola Tepper was asking, Lyotard suspects that by the time we need to escape Earth, we might not longer be human creatures. Do you believe that? Could we ever consider ourselves human in the first place? Human being put in quotation marks. Do you think there is a line where we become more tech to still be? And Ola says you are elaborating on it in your answer to the other question, but maybe speaking directly to Lyotard's position.
Yeah.
Yes.
So obviously, like, I'm not Elon Musk, and in a way I'm quite probably opposed.
Thank you for that.
Manner of philosophizing about humans and what's going to happen, and the idea that, it's inevitable, like him and Nick Bostrom and the whole kind of transhumanism crowd from Oxford kind of Institute for the Future. So, that there we will, I mean, we've always been partly non-human, and presumably that kind of post-humanism research center that you're leading, Christine, and that we are meeting under the aegis of here, is also exploring this kind of non-human dimension to the human. So in some sense, but it's very difficult to know what we will become. I mean, shorter term, I think I can make some of these predictions. I'm interested in also safeguarding some, human conditions or ways of surviving for, on the planet under current kind of climactic, political or nuclear threats that we are experiencing. So absolutely. At the same time, longer term, I mean, I don't think there is anything that will stop human species from becoming extinct the way lots of other species have become. But what kind of timescale we are talking about, it's difficult to say. I mean, I would rather listen to climate scientists who are obviously predicting some scenarios, and less about dates, but more about if we don't do this, then the conditions of our survival as humans are going to be significantly reduced, shrunk. So that call, that kind of science-based call, for me is also a call for a certain responsibility, for a response towards not so much preserving the human, but also while we have the humans, and a certain responsibility towards near future humans, let's them call, the children, the children of the children, but, on the scale of millions and billions of years, I have no idea. And but history, like long, deep geological, long-term history, teaches us that, we don't have much chance as a species. But who knows?
Yeah, there might be other species in the distant future who will find fossils of us, and yes, those will be the imprints that we have left. Yes. We have another question here from Mitch, who's asking, who do you mean when you say we know this and we know that? It seems to be that the growing tech illiteracy regarding AI, algorithms, clouds, etc., is increasingly part of a political crisis of knowledge, control, accessibility, etc. So, and Mitch continues and says, where power is located in the hands of a small group of knowers and the rest are at their mercy, misinformation is part of this too, I think.
Yes, absolutely. And in some sense, on the one hand, it's a certain shortcut. On the other hand, by we, I do mean kind of the species that calls itself human in its plurality, that whose, you know, in all their differentiation and non-human entanglement, it's that, you know, species that can not just speak and write and reflect, but also theorize its own condition. It's very possible that other species can do that. And there is more and more research suggesting that there are levels of consciousness available in other animals. But I'm talking about us in that somehow universalizing terms, referring to humans to whom reflection on its own condition of survivability, coupled with the possibility to dress that up either in philosophy, even though it is a pastime only interesting to a very small group of people, or through everyday kind of existential reflection for which you don't need sophisticated training, I think is something that occurs across, you know, but it is a kind of certain shortcut referring to, you know, humans here and now, I suppose.
Yes, interesting. And I think if we're going to, I mean, you did mention Bredotti earlier, if we're going to think of the human or the being that the kind of being we are as a zoe-geotechno framed subject position, then to me, anyways, what that says is that, well, this I that we've thought about and that we seem to be attached to, even on our better days, it's still a we, it's still a dispersed I, it's still one that is connected and entangled in these relations, including with the technological tools that surround us. I mean, so there's that consideration as well as to the we, and to me that means that there are significant portions of the we, as in we humanity, that are not zoe-geotechno entangled in the same kind of way, and so there's great variation, of course.
Absolutely, yes. In terms of not just, you know, technological access, but also access to survivability tools such as, I don't know, drinkable water, or, you know, correct temperatures, regulated temperatures. So.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's a further question from Maya, who says, you mentioned Spivak. Are there any post-colonial tools you are using in your research? What would those be?
There's a whole kind of variety, and for example, I'm now also trying to look at this idea of the kind of black cyborg and kind of Arab cyborg. So with the black cyborg, a beautiful exhibition just closed in London called kind of about the black futures, and using the idea of Afrofuturism and things around. So trying to imagine different futures. So on the one hand, the kind of post-colonial and decolonial theory that obviously tries to take a critical reflection to the narratives about, you know, our own, and again with this our, precisely to uncouple and to pose questions around that universal I that very often was the kind of white, colonizing, imperial. So to kind of give an account more of the position from which one is speaking, but also to account for forms of injustice and to listen to the kind of plural narratives, but also to make those kind of specifics around the idea of Afrofuturism, kind of black futurism, the combination of both, you know, the conditions of terrible historical injustice and current conditions of lack of survivability in different kind of urban or rural environments coupled with forms of neocolonialism which are unfolding in the world. And with that, I'm looking to art as much as theory to explore possibilities of different visions of the world, but also looking at other forms of imagination. Another one would be, I'm looking to Latin American ontologies as well, which are, through people like, Arturo Escobar, who are trying to imagine kind of different worlds and redesigning different worlds, going beyond kind of Western rationality. And again, it's obviously the opposite of this rationality is not irrationality or lack of rationality, but trying to, what would it mean to truly reimagine, ourselves in relation with others? So the kind of Latin American context with the different ontologies is of great interest to me.
Thank you so much. I find, I'm going to ask a question that maybe pertains more to your research methods and how you approach this thinking. I know it is of interest to a lot of our students here who are engaging or considering to engage in research creation projects. And what you were just saying there about imagination, I mean, many people have said we suffer, and I think they're right, and I would agree with them, that we suffer mostly from a failure of imagination. We are unable to imagine what's another way of existing on this Earth system might be, and so if we have a failure of imagination because we keep thinking in the same kind of way, then we need to figure out other ways of thinking. And it seems like it is not enough, because, for example, in my own work is mostly academic. I don't have a creative practice myself. I do engage with artworks and creative work, but more as a spectator, as a viewer, as someone who interacts with the work, and then thinks about it. But what does it do? Like, what does a creative practice add to this reflection that someone like me might be missing? And how can it expand even further that imagination, or trigger it, so that we can think about those futures? That really intrigues me. Yeah, if you could say something about what you think about that, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm just interested in this idea of, you could call it kind of creative humanities, because I also don't think that art has all the answers, and I'm, wary of not proposing, oh yes, we need to all turn to art, because, people have done that through history, hasn't always turned out well. So it's more about expanding a certain scope of epistemological possibilities, but it's also something else for me, asking a bigger question about who has the right to be creative. And I think there's a lot of, you can be very creative as a theorist. And I think there is a lot of interesting creative work going on within the humanities, within social sciences, within the kind of, design. It's just who has also the right to be heard. So any, like, again, random, shocking, stupid idea appearing, in a half-baked tweet from one of our digital kind of messiahs in the form of like techno boys, it's always taken up as the next, future. So who has the platform? Whose ideas of the future are being taken up? So I actually don't know whether we lack imagination. I think we already, and especially in I think arts, humanities, are very well predisposed to think of alternatives. And I think there are good reasons why there is such a foreclosing of arts and humanities, both in their creative and more exegetic or textual guise, if you like, precisely because, maybe there are those who don't like these ideas getting too imaginative. So I think imagination is foreshortened, and it's only a certain group of people whose the whole idea of imagination is to, ensure that their own worldviews and their own current status is preserved. So
it's not so much a lack of imagination that we suffer from, you would say, but rather the lack of an appropriate space given to the expression of that imagination.
And it's almost like a fear of imagination that, don't, and the idea of what, It's like, and lots of ideas, like even Silicon Valley, I mean, presents itself being so crazy and just breaking things and doing, but it's very conservative, and lots of its worldviews and ideas are just so proscribed, this mode of thinking about things. So it's just, so I don't think necessarily this is what imagination happens.
Okay, yeah, good. I'm going to refresh again, just to make sure that I'm not missing any question. And I will issue a last call for a question or comment on the part of the audience. I've asked a lot of questions myself, but I find your work really exciting and stimulating. So, but I don't have to be the only person asking. So maybe we'll just wait a minute. If there's one last comment or question coming in, I am monitoring the chat. Okay, well, seeing none, I would like to thank you very much, Joanna, for sharing your research and your work with us. You have pointed to some of the work that is available online, so I invite our audience members to pay a visit to these repositories and just delve a little further into Joanna's work. And so thank you so much for the talk today. And
thank you for the invitation.